Apache woman was dragging away believing she would be abused, but the cowboy wasn't a bad man. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. The vast plains stretched endlessly, dry and dusty, dotted with sparse shrubs and rocks. An Apache woman moved carefully through the rough terrain, her steps silent and deliberate. She was alone, and the quiet of the land pressed in around her. Barry. Every sound seemed louder here. The rustling of the grass, the distant call of a hawk, the whisper of the wind through the rocks. She had learned to listen to the land, to read its signs, and to trust her instincts, pretended dispute. Tonight, however, her instincts were screaming at her that something was wrong. She paused near a small rise and looked around. The shadows were growing longer, and a chill ran down her spine. Her eyes, sharp and watchful, caught a movement in the distance. A figure was approaching, slowly but steadily. At first she thought it was a traveler, a man like many others who crossed these plains, but as the figure drew closer, her heart began to pound. There was something about the way he moved, the way he carried himself, that made her tense, rasp, her mind filled with stories she had heard from other women in her tribe. Stories of strangers who had caused harm, of travelers who had lied and trapped innocent people.
She tightened her grip on the small bundle she carried.
Inside were her few possessions, the things she could not leave behind. A piece of cloth wrapped carefully around a small knife, some food, and a keepsake from her family. She had left her home early that morning to gather herbs for her mother and younger siblings. It had been a routine trip, one she had done many times. But today, something had shifted. Something about the way the wind moved through the grass, or the way the figure's shadow fell across the earth, made her feel that danger was near. The man was closer now. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, his clothes dusty and worn from travel. A horse followed behind him, its reins loose in his hand. At first he seemed calm, almost hesitant, as if he did not want to alarm her. But the woman could not see his expression clearly. All she saw were the sharp edges of his silhouette and the slow, deliberate rhythm of his steps. Her mind raced. She had to think fast. She had to protect herself. Without warning, she turned and began to move again, faster this time. But the uneven ground made her stumble, but she caught herself quickly, dragging her small bundle along. Her heart pounded like a drum in her chest. She knew that if the man caught her, she might not have a chance to explain herself. Stories of abductions and attacks flooded her memory, and she felt the weight of generations of warnings pressing down on her. She had to survive. She had to stay free. The man's voice called out, soft and cautious. Wait. But the woman could not hear the words clearly. All she felt was fear. She did not know his language fully, and the tone of strangers could be deceiving. Her only thought was to get away. She dodged between rocks, climbed small ridges, and kept her eyes on the horizon, searching for a place to hide. Her muscles burned and sweat stung her eyes, but she pushed herself harder. The plains were unforgiving, and the sun's last rays made long shadows that twisted like fingers across the ground. Every step she took seemed to echo in her mind, a reminder that she could not stop. She stumbled again, and this time her bundle slipped from her hands. She caught it just in time, holding it close, as if it were a shield against the unknown. The man followed carefully. He did not rush or run. He seemed to understand the fear in her movements, the urgency in her flight. He called out again, this time using gestures, raising his hands to show he carried nothing in them. The woman paused for a brief moment, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Could he really be telling the truth? She had been taught to trust her instincts above all else, and her instincts still screamed that he might be dangerous. Pah! She shook her head and continued running, forcing herself not to look back. She remembered the stories her mother had told her when she was a child, stories of brave women who faced danger and survived by using their wits and speed. She thought of the ancestors who had crossed these lands long before her, who had navigated the plains, the deserts, and the forests with nothing but their knowledge of the earth and their sharp minds. She felt a surge of courage. She would not be an easy victim. She would not allow fear to control her completely.
As the man drew closer, she noticed something strange. He did not move like the men in the stories.
He did not make sudden attacks, nor did he raise a weapon. Instead, he stayed at a distance, keeping his horse steady, trying to show he meant no harm. She did not trust him yet, but a small part of her curiosity stirred. Who was he really? Why was he here? Could he actually be different from the others, or was this a trick to lower her guard? The wind shifted, carrying his scent to her, a mix of dust, sweat, and leather. It was not menacing, only human. Her mind struggled to reconcile the fear she felt with the subtle signs of honesty she could perceive. She slowed slightly, moving cautiously, keeping her eyes on him but not making any sudden movements. The plains were wide, and for a moment it seemed like she might lose him in the shadows of the hills. Then, a loud noise startled her. A branch snapping underfoot, perhaps, or the sudden cry of an animal. She froze, clutching her bundle tightly. The man stopped too, raising a hand in a gesture of peace. It was the first moment she saw him clearly, not just as a shadow. He had a strong, steady gaze, and there was a calmness in his eyes that seemed almost unnatural in the tense environment. Best. She did not understand why, but a tiny spark of hope ignited within her. Maybe, just maybe, he was not what she feared. But still, she did not lower her guard. She continued to move, carefully keeping her distance. Every instinct told her to run, but a part of her wanted to watch him, to understand. As she moved through the rugged terrain, she thought about what she would do if he approached too closely. Beyond it, she had a small knife, sharp and well-maintained, and she knew how to use it. She had learned to defend herself, to survive in a world that could be harsh and unforgiving. The man, sensing her hesitation, slowed his pace further. He spoke again, using simple words and gestures, showing that he had no weapon drawn. He pointed to a small stream nearby, then to her, as if to suggest water or safety. She hesitated, unsure if this was a trap. Her mind raced through possibilities. What if he wanted to lure her into danger? What if he had accomplices waiting nearby? But something about the way he moved, the care in his gestures, made her pause. For the first time since she saw him, she stopped completely, crouching behind a large rock. She watched him, noting every detail. The way his hat shaded his eyes, the way he held the reins lightly, the calmness in his movements. He seemed patient, willing to let her make the next decision. Her heart still pounded, but she realized she had a choice. She could continue to flee blindly, or she could observe and see if his intentions were truly harmful. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the plains. The colors of the sky shifted, and the temperature began to drop. Brace. She felt the exhaustion creeping in, her muscles aching from the constant movement. But she also felt a strange mixture of fear and curiosity. Who was this man? Why did he follow her? And most importantly, was it possible that her fear had misled her? Ask her. As the evening air grew cooler, she made a silent promise to herself. She would not let fear alone decide her actions. Breaths. She would stay alert, yes, but she would also watch carefully. And maybe, just maybe, she would learn something unexpected about the world, and about the man who had appeared out of nowhere on the vast, empty plains. The wind had grown colder as the sun sank behind the distant hills, casting the plains in long, dark shadows. The Apache woman moved with caution, her eyes scanning every inch of the land ahead. Her heart still raced from the encounter earlier, and the sight of the cowboy following her, even at a distance, kept her muscles tense and ready to act. She knew the plains could be dangerous, even without the presence of strangers. Wild animals roamed at night, and the uneven ground could easily turn a stumble into injury. Yet, her focus remained on him, Britt. She had learned long ago that appearances could be deceiving, but in her current state, every shadow, every sound seemed like a threat. She tried to keep her breathing steady, whispering to herself that she must remain alert. Her small bundle of possessions pressed against her chest, a reminder that she could not afford to be careless. She could not risk losing her food, her knife, or the keepsake from her family. But even as she thought about her belongings, her mind returned to the man. Why was he following her? Surely no traveler would come this far into the plains without reason. And if he did, why follow at such a distance, not speaking clearly, not showing his intentions? She picked her way carefully over rocks and small ridges, trying to find a path that might put distance between her and the man. Burst. Each step was deliberate, calculated, yet every move seemed to bring him closer. She felt like a small bird being chased across an open field by a shadow. Panic clawed at her chest, but she fought to remain calm. She had survived these plains before, using her wits, her strength, and her instincts. She could do it again, she would do it again. The cowboy's voice called out once more, soft but clear enough to be understood. I am not going to hurt you.
Breaths. Please, stop for a moment.
He sounded calm, patient, almost weary.
The woman slowed slightly, her body tense as she peeked over a rock. He was still there, a few yards behind, his hands empty, his horse steady beside him. She noticed how he tried to keep his distance, as if respecting her space, yet his gaze remained fixed on her, careful not to startle her further. Her mind raced with conflicting thoughts. She had always been taught to mistrust strangers, especially men who appeared suddenly and without explanation. The stories of abductions, of women taken by force, filled her mind. Breaths. Yet, something about his posture, the way he moved, seemed different. He did not look aggressive, only persistent. Britt. Could he truly be harmless? Or was this just a trick, a way to lower her guard before causing harm? The night was approaching quickly. The plains were vast and open, offering little cover. If she stayed out here much longer, the darkness would make her vulnerable. She needed to find shelter, somewhere hidden, even if only temporary. Grasp. Her sharp eyes scanning for a place to hide. A small ravine appeared in the distance, lined with bushes and rocks. It would be difficult terrain, but it offered concealment. Perhaps there, she could rest for a while, catch her breath, and decide what to do next. She moved quickly but quietly toward the ravine, careful not to draw attention. The ground was uneven, and she stumbled slightly over a hidden root, catching herself just in time. Her bundle shifted in her hands, but she held it tight. Braid. As she moved, she noticed the cowboy's silhouette in the distance, following her still. He did not rush. He did not raise his voice. He simply maintained a steady pace, giving her the space she clearly demanded. The woman's mind struggled with the duality of fear and curiosity. Why did he follow so patiently? Why did he not try to scare her or force her to stop? Could it be that he genuinely meant no harm? She shook her head, trying to dismiss the thought. She could not afford to trust him. Not yet. Survival depended on caution, and caution meant keeping distance, keeping alert, keeping control of the situation. As she reached the edge of the ravine, she paused to catch her breath. The moon was beginning to rise, casting a pale light across the land. Shadows stretched long and eerie, making familiar shapes seem threatening. Breath, she crouched low, pressing herself against a large rock and tried to calm her racing heart. Her eyes scanned the area, ensuring that there was no immediate danger. Then, carefully, she looked back toward the cowboy. He was still there, standing near a small group of rocks, watching her movements. His horse shifted slightly beneath him, but he remained calm, a quiet presence in the vast openness. The woman noticed how he did not approach aggressively, how he seemed almost hesitant.
For the first time, a small doubt entered her mind. Could he really be harmless?
Could he truly be different from the strangers her family had warned her about? The wind carried his voice again, soft but understandable, brusque. You do not need to be afraid. I only want to help. She hesitated, unsure if she could believe him. Could she risk stopping, even for a moment? Could she risk showing that she was listening? The stories of danger in the plains had taught her that even a second of trust could be costly. But her exhaustion was growing. Her muscles ached, her breath came in sharp gasps, and the constant tension was wearing her down. She made a decision. Slowly, cautiously, she moved a few steps toward a small clearing near the ravine, where the ground was flatter and easier to traverse. She did not look directly at him, but she allowed herself to watch his movements out of the corner of her eye. He did not advance. He did not make a sudden gesture. He remained where he was, calm, waiting. The woman's mind wandered to her childhood, to the lessons her mother had taught her about survival and observation. But
Always watch carefully, her mother had said. Do not act too quickly.
listen before you speak. Learn before you trust. Breaths. She realized that she had been so focused on fleeing that she had not observed him fully. Now she could see small details, the careful way he handled his horse, the empty hands, the patient posture. He did not move like the men in the stories who caused harm. The night air grew colder, and the stars began to appear, sparkling like tiny fireflies in the darkening sky. The plains seemed endless, and the woman realized how exposed she truly was. Yet she also realized that the cowboy's presence, though frightening at first, was strangely consistent. He was not rushing. He was not pressuring her. Perhaps, she thought, he truly did mean no harm. A sudden noise startled her, a coyote calling in the distance, or perhaps the sound of rocks shifting underfoot. She froze, clutching her bundle tightly. The cowboy's voice came again, gentle and calm. You are safe. Nothing will hurt you if you stay here for a moment. She considered running again, but the exhaustion and the weight of her fear made her hesitate. Slowly, cautiously, she stepped closer to the edge of the ravine, keeping her eyes on him but not making any sudden movements. The man stayed still, his gaze steady. Grasp. He lifted a hand in a gesture of peace, and for the first time, the woman felt a small spark of trust. Perhaps he was not a threat. Perhaps the stories she had carried in her mind were not the reality of this man. Yet she remained wary. She would not allow herself to be careless. She would observe, she would test, and she would protect herself above all else. The wind rustled through the grass, carrying with it a sense of quiet anticipation. The woman crouched low, her muscles still tense, her eyes never leaving him. She wondered what he wanted, why he had followed her so far. Was he truly kind, or was he playing a careful game to lure her into danger? She could not know yet, but she realized that she had to find out. The plains stretched endlessly, dark and mysterious under the moonlight. The woman and the cowboy faced each other across the distance, two figures connected by fear, curiosity, and the unknown. Both understood the unspoken rules of this encounter: patience, observation, caution. Neither moved too quickly, neither spoke too loudly. And in that tense silence, a small, fragile possibility began to grow. The possibility that perhaps, just perhaps, he was not the danger she had feared all along. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a silver light over the plains. Shadows stretched long and deep, giving even familiar rocks and bushes a strange, threatening shape. Rasp. The Apache woman crouched behind a boulder near the edge of the ravine. Her heart still raced from the long chase, but her mind was sharper now. She had observed the cowboy for some time, noting how carefully he moved, how he kept his hands empty, and how his horse never neighed or acted skittish. Still, she could not bring herself to fully trust him. She had slowed her pace earlier, allowing herself to watch him cautiously from a distance. But now she realized she had to make a decision. Staying hidden might protect her for the moment, but the night would grow colder, and her food and water were limited. She needed to move, to find a safe spot for the night. But the plains were wide and empty, offering few hiding places. And the man was still following her, moving carefully yet steadily. A sudden crack of a branch underfoot made her flinch. The cowboy froze instantly, his eyes fixed on her position. Then, slowly, he raised a hand, showing a gesture of peace. Grace. She could see the sincerity in his stance. But old instincts die hard. She could not simply step out and trust him.
Not yet, not after all the stories she had heard growing up.
But then she noticed something that made her pause, a small act of kindness, almost unnoticed yet clear in its meaning. He pointed toward a large boulder nearby, which would provide shelter from the cold wind. It was subtle, almost too subtle, but she saw the intention behind it. He wanted to help, not harm. Her heart thumped in her chest as a flicker of hope mingled with the fear. Could he really be trying to protect her? Could this man, who had seemed so frightening at first, actually mean no harm? She took a cautious step forward, keeping low. "Brown, who are you?" she asked softly, her voice trembling slightly, a mixture of fear and curiosity.
The cowboy's face was calm in the moonlight.
He spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully. "My name is Samuel."
I mean no harm. I only want to help you.
His voice was steady, not commanding or threatening. He kept his hands raised, empty, showing he carried nothing that could be used to hurt her. She studied him carefully. His eyes were open and honest, not filled with anger or cruelty. His body language was patient, almost pleading. Still, caution remained her guide. She could not take a step forward without a plan, without being ready to defend herself. "Why are you following me?" she asked, her voice firmer now. Psst. Samuel gestured toward the ground.
I saw you leaving the village. I knew the plains at night could be dangerous. I wanted to make sure you were safe.
He spoke the words slowly, pausing to let her absorb them. His tone carried no arrogance or judgment, only concern.
The woman narrowed her eyes. Her mind raced. Could this be true? Could someone really follow her out of concern, without any selfish reason? She had grown up hearing that travelers, especially men who came out of nowhere, were dangerous. She had never imagined that someone might act differently, that someone might truly care about another person's safety. But the signs were there, the calmness, the patience, the gestures of peace. Slowly, her fear began to mingle with a cautious curiosity. She took another step, this time not hiding completely behind the rock. Samuel did not advance. He stayed where he was, giving her space. "I have water," he said, pointing to a small canteen he carried. "If you are thirsty, you may drink. I will not come closer." Bray. The woman hesitated, her throat dry from the long chase. She wanted to take the water, but the old instinct screamed that it could be a trick. Breaths. She studied him for a long moment, measuring his expressions, his gestures, his posture. Then, carefully, she took a small step toward him, keeping her eyes locked on his. Slowly, she extended her hand to accept the canteen, her fingers brushing his briefly. Samuel held it steady, letting her take it without moving closer. The water was cold and sweet, and as she drank, she felt her body relax slightly. The tension in her shoulders eased a little, and the constant racing of her heart slowed. She still did not fully trust him, but she realized that perhaps she had been too quick to judge. Perhaps not every stranger in the plains was a threat. Perhaps some men were different. Breath. After a few moments, she took a deep breath and asked, "Why me? Why follow me all this way?"
Samuel looked thoughtful, as if choosing the right words carefully.
"I saw you walking alone in the dark. The plains can be dangerous, and I wanted to make sure no harm came to you."
I did not know you, but I did not want anything bad to happen. His eyes met hers steadily, without a hint of deception.
She studied him for a long moment, her mind turning over every detail. The way he had not rushed, the way he had kept his distance, the way he had offered water without pressure. Slowly, the walls of fear that had surrounded her began to crack. She could feel a small shift inside her, a cautious opening toward trust. But trust was not easy. The plains had taught her to be careful, to question everything, and to protect herself above all else. She kept her knife close, her body tense, ready to act if he made a sudden move. Yet she allowed herself to take another small step toward him. It was a gesture, small but meaningful. It said, "I am still wary, but I am listening." Samuel nodded slightly, understanding her caution. "I will not hurt you," he said softly. "I only want to make sure you are safe for the night. If you wish, I can guide you to a safer place to rest."
The woman hesitated. The idea of traveling with him felt strange and frightening.
But the thought of staying out in the open, alone and vulnerable, was worse. Slowly, carefully, she nodded. Desk. She would not fully trust him, but she could allow him to lead as long as she remained alert and in control. They began to move together slowly, the woman keeping a few steps ahead, her eyes scanning the darkness, while Samuel followed at a respectful distance. Every step was cautious, deliberate. The plains seemed quieter now, the wind calmer. Even the moonlight felt softer, illuminating their path without casting threatening shadows. As they moved, the woman noticed small things about him, the way he handled his horse with care, the way he watched the terrain, and the way he seemed aware of her need for space. Breaths. She could not help but feel a growing sense of relief. Perhaps the plains had not delivered danger this time, but safety, through an unexpected man who had chosen patience over force. Best. After a short while, they reached a small clearing near the base of a gentle hill, protected from the wind. Samuel gestured toward it, showing that it would be a safer place to rest.
The woman approached cautiously, keeping her bundle close. She could see that the spot offered cover and a sense of security, even in the open plains.
She sat down slowly, her body aching from hours of movement. Samuel remained a short distance away, letting her have space. He unpacked a small blanket and laid it on the ground, then gestured toward it, showing that she could use it. She hesitated, but eventually took it, wrapping it around her shoulders. The warmth was comforting, and the tension in her muscles eased slightly.
For a long time, they sat in silence, two figures connected by caution and curiosity.
The woman studied him quietly, noting the honesty in his eyes, the patience in his gestures, and the kindness in his actions. Slowly, she began to understand that not every man in the plains was a threat. Some, like Samuel, could be allies, guides, even protectors. Finally, she spoke softly, almost to herself. I thought you would harm me. Samuel nodded, understanding. I know. You have every reason to be cautious. The plains are not always kind. But I mean no harm. I only wish to help. The woman considered his words, and for the first time since the chase began she believed them. Not completely, but enough to allow herself a small measure of trust. Perhaps the plains had taught her well, not only to survive but also to recognize true intentions when they were shown. As the night grew deeper, the two remained in the clearing, quiet but aware of each other's presence. A fragile connection was forming, born of caution, observation, and honesty. And while the Apache woman had not yet let down her guard completely, a small part of her heart began to open to the possibility that perhaps the cowboy was not the danger she had feared all along. The night had deepened, and a cold wind swept across the plains. The stars shone brightly above, but their light barely warmed the land below. The Apache woman wrapped her small blanket tighter around her shoulders, still cautious despite the earlier conversation with the cowboy. She had begun to sense that he meant no harm, but the fear that had driven her all day did not vanish easily. It lingered like a shadow, reminding her to remain alert. Samuel the cowboy sat a few feet away, his horse quietly grazing nearby. He had made a small fire, just enough to provide warmth, and he kept it low to avoid attracting attention.
Every movement he made was careful, deliberate, showing that he respected her need for space.
Brash. He did not speak unless necessary, allowing her to observe him and decide whether she could trust him further. The silence of the plains was suddenly broken by a distant, eerie howl. The woman's eyes widened. Coyotes were common here, but at night they could be bold, especially if they smelled fear. Break. She instinctively clutched her knife, her body tense. Samuel noticed immediately and moved closer, but not too close, keeping a respectful distance. He spoke softly, calm and steady. It's nothing you cannot handle, but we should be careful. Her heart raced, and for a moment old instincts took over. She wanted to flee again, to disappear into the darkness where she could move silently and alone. But the plains were vast, and running without knowing the terrain could be dangerous. She glanced at Samuel, noting how he had not panicked, how his horse remained calm, how his voice remained steady. Slowly, she realized she could rely on his presence, not fully, but enough to consider cooperating. The wind grew stronger, rustling the tall grass around them. But Samuel gestured toward the small hill behind the clearing, showing her that it could provide better shelter from the wind and a safer vantage point. She hesitated but understood that staying in the open was not wise. Carefully she rose, keeping her knife close, and followed him a few steps behind. She noted how he moved slowly, ensuring she had time to adjust to every step. As they reached the hill, the ground became steeper and more uneven. Rocks jutted out, and loose dirt threatened to make every step dangerous. She stumbled once, nearly losing her balance, but Samuel's quick glance and slight gesture showed concern without interfering. She could sense that he would help if needed but would not push himself onto her space. Yes. That understanding, subtle but clear, made her feel a growing sense of safety. Halfway up the hill, the wind suddenly shifted, carrying a strange, acrid smell. She froze, sensing danger immediately. Her heart pounded. Was it smoke from a fire? Was it something more dangerous, like a prairie fire, or an animal? Pass. Samuel noticed her pause and looked in the same direction. His eyes narrowed slightly, calculating. A fire, he said cautiously. Not far from here. We need to move quickly.
The woman's pulse quickened. A fire on these plains could be deadly, spreading fast with the wind.
She realized that her earlier fear of the cowboy was now secondary to a greater, more immediate threat. She glanced at him, ready to follow, but also ready to act on her own if needed. Breaths. Samuel nodded almost imperceptibly, acknowledging her courage and independence. Then, together they began to move faster, carefully navigating the steep terrain. The flames were faint at first, but the smoke grew thicker with every step. The smell of burning grass and dry wood filled the air, stinging her lungs. Breath. She realized that the fire might block their path to the lower plains if it spread quickly. There was no time for hesitation. Brr. She glanced at Samuel, and for the first time, she let herself trust his judgment fully. She followed his lead, moving carefully but decisively toward a safer route. The climb became more difficult as the wind pushed against them, carrying sparks from the fire across the hill. She felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with fear and determination. She knew that she could survive alone, but the presence of Samuel gave her an added strength, a feeling that they could face the danger together. Even now she kept her knife ready, alert for any other unexpected threat. As they reached the top of the hill, the fire below grew brighter, casting orange light across the plains. She could see how quickly it was spreading. Brant, Samuel pointed toward a narrow path leading to a small cluster of rocks, a place where they could safely wait until the fire passed. The woman followed silently, noting his careful movements and steady guidance. She realized that his presence was not a restriction, but a help. A way to survive a danger far greater than her initial fears.
Halfway along the path, the ground shifted unexpectedly.
She slipped slightly on loose soil, and before she could steady herself, Samuel reached out instinctively. His hand touched her shoulder just enough to guide her without controlling her movement. She froze, startled by the contact, but then realized he meant no harm. His touch was careful, respectful, and protective. For the first time, she allowed herself to relax just a little, knowing that he would not hurt her, even in the midst of danger. They reached the small cluster of rocks and crouched behind them. The wind howled, carrying sparks and ash, but the rocks provided enough shelter to keep them safe. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, but a new emotion began to grow. Respect. Not only for herself, for surviving, but for him as well. He had shown patience, courage, and concern for her well-being without demanding trust or obedience. The fire continued to spread below, but the worst of it seemed to pass them by. The woman took a moment to catch her breath, wiping sweat and ash from her face. Breath. Samuel offered her a small piece of bread and water. She hesitated, but this time she took it without fear, understanding that he meant them both to survive. For she realized that trust was not about abandoning caution, but about observing actions and intentions, even in the most frightening circumstances. As the flames burned out in the distance, the plains returned to their quiet state, though the air still smelled faintly of smoke. The woman looked at Samuel, her mind reflecting on the events of the night. She had feared him, chased him, and doubted his intentions, yet he had shown her patience, respect, and guidance.
In the midst of danger, he had proven that actions were far more important than appearances. She spoke softly, almost in awe.
You saved me. Samuel shook his head gently. We saved each other. You were brave and smart. That is why we made it through. Desperate, His words were simple, but they carried weight. The woman felt a strange warmth in her chest. For the first time since the chase began, she felt not only safety, but also a growing sense of connection. The night passed quietly after that. They kept a small fire burning low, taking turns watching the plains for any new dangers. The woman remained alert, but she also allowed herself to rest a little, knowing that Samuel would respect her space and safety. By morning, a fragile but strong trust had begun to grow between them, a trust built not on words alone, but on shared experience, respect, and courage. The Apache woman realized that her fear, while necessary, had almost kept her from recognizing the truth. Not every stranger was dangerous. Desperation. Not every man carried harm, and courage, patience, and honesty could form bonds even in the most unexpected situations. Breaths. She looked at Samuel quietly, understanding that their connection was not just about surviving the plains, but about seeing each other as humans. Flawed, cautious, but capable of great understanding. As the first light of dawn touched the plains, the woman felt a sense of relief and calm. The fire was gone, the danger had passed, and she was alive. But more than that, she felt a deeper lesson settling in her heart. Courage was not only about facing the unknown, but also about opening oneself to see the truth, even when fear had clouded judgment. And in that truth, she had found a companion. Someone who had shown her that even the most frightening moments could lead to understanding, respect, and hope. The first light of dawn spread slowly across the plains, turning the sky into a soft shade of gold. The Apache woman stretched, her muscles sore from the long night, but her heart felt lighter than it had in hours. The fire from last night had burned itself out, leaving only faint traces of smoke in the distance. The danger had passed, and for the first time since the chase began, she felt a real sense of safety. She looked towards Samuel, the cowboy, who was standing a short distance away tending to his horse. His movements were calm and careful, and she noticed how he never once hurried or acted impatiently. The sight brought a sense of gratitude to her heart. He had followed her across the plains not to harm her, but to protect her. He had been patient, respectful, and brave, showing that his actions spoke far louder than words. The woman slowly approached him, her footsteps deliberate. She carried her small bundle wrapped securely, but she no longer felt the same tension that had weighed her down the night before. There was still caution, but it had been replaced in part by understanding. Samuel noticed her coming and offered a small nod of acknowledgement, a silent gesture of respect. "You survived," he said simply, his voice calm and steady. "The plains can be dangerous, but you are strong." She studied him for a moment, searching for any hint of trickery or deceit, but found none. His eyes were honest, steady, and kind. Slowly she spoke, her voice soft but clear. I was afraid of you at first."
I thought you wanted to hurt me. Samuel nodded, understanding.
"I know, and you were right to be careful. The plains are not always safe, and strangers can be dangerous.
But I meant no harm.
I only wanted to make sure you were safe." She took a deep breath, letting the weight of the past day sink in. All the fear, all the running, all the tension. It had led her to this moment of clarity. She realized that her assumptions had almost prevented her from seeing the truth. Not every stranger carried danger. Not every man who followed had bad intentions. And sometimes courage and patience could bridge the gap between fear and understanding. I see that now," she said quietly. "You have shown me that not all men are dangerous, that sometimes someone can care, even if it is unexpected." Samuel's lips curved into a small, respectful smile. "We all carry our fears," he said. Breaths. "It takes time to understand each other, Tonight we learned to trust a little, and that helped us both survive." The woman nodded, feeling a sense of relief and quiet pride. She had faced fear, navigated danger, and discovered something unexpected about the man who had once seemed a threat. Her mind wandered briefly to her family, to the stories she had heard growing up, and she realized that this experience had taught her a deeper lesson about the world. Together they began to descend the hill, careful with each step on the loose and uneven ground. The plains stretched endlessly around them, but the morning light made the landscape feel less intimidating. Birds began to sing softly, and the wind carried a gentler, warmer air. Every step felt lighter than the last, not just physically, but emotionally. They moved as cautious allies now, each aware of the other's presence but no longer dominated by fear. At the base of the hill, a small stream glistened in the morning sun.
Samuel stopped, gesturing toward the water. "I ask, how?"
"We should drink before we continue," he said. The woman nodded and knelt by the stream, cupping her hands to drink. The cold water refreshed her, washing away some of the exhaustion from the long night. Samuel followed, drinking a little from his canteen and then offering it to her again. She took it without hesitation, understanding that trust, once established through action, could grow quietly but steadily. As they rested for a moment, the woman spoke softly. "I still cannot believe I thought you were dangerous. I ran from you without knowing you. I judged you before understanding." Samuel looked at her thoughtfully. "We all do that sometimes. Fear can make us see threats where there are none. But courage is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward despite it. You were brave last night, and you learned to trust a little. That is strength." The woman felt warmth in her chest. His words were simple, but they carried meaning she would not forget. She realized that the plains had taught her not just about survival, but also about judgment, understanding, and respect. Samuel had shown her that patience and honesty could overcome fear, and she had shown him that courage and observation could lead to trust.
After a few minutes, they continued walking across the plains.
The sun rose higher, casting a warm glow over the land, making the rocks, grass, and distant hills shimmer. The woman felt a sense of calm she had not experienced in hours, a quiet satisfaction that she had survived not just the night, but the misunderstanding that had caused so much fear.
As they walked, Samuel spoke occasionally, pointing out small landmarks and subtle dangers in the terrain. She listened carefully, noting his knowledge of the land.
His guidance was helpful, but never controlling. She could see now that his respect for her independence was as important as his knowledge of the plains. They moved together, a team forged not by friendship alone, but by shared experience, trust, and understanding.
By mid-morning, they reached a small village on the edge of the plains.
The sight of other people brought a sense of comfort, but also reflection. She realized that the plains had tested her in more ways than one. She had faced fear, judged a stranger too quickly, and learned the importance of observation, patience, and cautious trust. Samuel had guided her safely, not with force, but with care and respect. The woman turned to him, her eyes meeting his. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For everything. You could have left, but you stayed. You did not push me. You did not force me. You helped me when I needed it most." Samuel nodded, his expression calm and sincere. "I only did what anyone should do." We all face dangers. Sometimes helping another person is the right thing to do. You were brave, and that made all the difference. She looked around the village, then back at him. Breath. She realized that this encounter had changed her. The fear that had driven her for so long had been tempered by understanding. The plains were still vast and dangerous, but she now knew that courage, patience, and honesty could guide her through challenges, even when the path was uncertain. Samuel prepared to leave the village, ready to continue his own journey across the plains. The woman watched him, feeling gratitude and respect. "Will I see you again?" she asked softly. He smiled gently. "Perhaps. The plains are large, but sometimes paths cross for a reason. Remember what you learned and you will always be safe." With that, he mounted his horse and rode slowly away, disappearing into the distance. The woman watched until he was gone, then turned back toward the village. Brace. She felt a sense of closure, a quiet understanding that the encounter had left her stronger, wiser, and more aware of the true nature of people. As she walked into the village, she carried more than just her small bundle of belongings. Breath. She carried lessons learned under the moonlight, across the plains, in the midst of fear and misunderstanding. She had faced danger, survived, and discovered the importance of trust, respect, and courage, and though the plains stretched endlessly behind her, she felt ready to face whatever came next, knowing that understanding and patience could bridge even the widest gaps between fear and trust. The Apache woman never forgot the cowboy who had followed her, not to harm, but to help. She remembered his patience, his honesty, and his courage, and she carried that memory with her, a reminder that the world was full of surprises, some frightening, some dangerous, but also some full of kindness, respect, and hope. The plains had tested her, the night had challenged her, and fear had guided her. But through it all she had learned that the heart could recognize truth when shown, and that courage was not only in facing danger, but also in opening oneself to trust, even when fear had clouded judgment.
And so, as the sun rose fully over the plains, she walked into the village, stronger and wiser, carrying a story of fear, courage, and the quiet power of understanding between two strangers brought together by fate, respect, and the lessons of the wild.